Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 75, Called by Kali, with our guest via Skype, Chandra Alexandre. Hey Chandra, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Gina.
Thanks for coming on, this is great. So for the people who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. What a great opening to say anything I wanted to say.
Absolutely.
So my name is Chandra Alexandre, and I am the founder and a spiritual leader of the SHARANYA community. We are based in San Francisco, but serve an international and diverse community of spiritual worshipers and seekers. We particularly focus on the divine female and are a tantric tradition. So our lineage comes from India. I was initiated in India twice, first in 1998 when I converted to the faith and then received diksha, or formal initiation into the mysteries of goddess Kali. And I'm happy to talk more about her and that experience. And then 5 years later, after spending quite a bit of time in India and annual pilgrimages and work and exploration, 5 years later received my second diksha, or initiation, into another strand of Tantra. So in the tradition, we bring together both of those different strands and honor our ancestors and the spiritual teachers of our tradition and faith. And I would say that in the vein of having an exploratory conversation with you and everybody listening, it's probably important to note, if you don't already know, that much like the esoteric branches of any of the world's faiths, Hinduism considers Tantra, or Tantra considers Hinduism, sort of in a parallel relationship to the way Kabbalah and Judaism, or Gnosticism and Christianity, or Sufism and Islam are connected. And so the Tantra that we practice is an authentic, very much connected to indigenous spiritual traditions from South Asia tradition. And it has wonderful connections to the kind of spiritual realities Western pagans and practitioners of eclectic paganism and magic are familiar with, in and through the many openings and portals to the unseen, and the ways in which we work with, especially the subtle body, in connection to our waking and seen reality, but also those spaces that are considered liminal. And we do that through our direct practices, as well as our engagement with the divine in her myriad forms. So that's a little bit about the tradition and some of the space that I occupy. But I could also say that the tradition is firmly rooted in its commitment as a marginal, and I would say somewhat outside of, as the esoteric traditions are, the normative traditions that we hear about and speak about, firmly committed to bringing the marginal to center. And we do a lot of work in the space of social justice and activism. And Kali Ma, our, let's say, primary focus in and through our work as the divine female, sacred feminine, is very much a revolutionary and a instigator and a conjurer of belief, faith, practice, and devotion in spaces toward liberation. So very much engaged in that reality in and through the various worlds as well.
Wow. It just seems there's so much there. So why don't I start with, how did you get interested in this?
Well, as with many of us, she chose me. I think that's the way that it's often said. I didn't previously have any particular connection to India or Hinduism or Tantra or Kali or any of the openings through witchcraft or paganism that the dark goddess often sort of makes known to us. But I was very active spiritually, and my grandmother taught me the ways of the unseen world at a very, very early age. So I was very blessed to have in my mother line those direct teachings, and benefited greatly from them. And then in about 1992, I had a dream, and it was much like one of those waking realities where you're not quite sure if you're dreaming or not, alive or not, sort of what world you're inhabiting. But the goddess came to me and appeared to me in this dream at a very interesting time in my life, where I was making, you could say at a young age, some very bad choices. had a lot of power in a spiritual community, a very large spiritual community for somebody so young, and was also struggling with anorexia nervosa. And so was really in the throes of a personal turmoil at the same time that publicly I was very out and engaged and active and respected. And so it was an interesting time of considering myself and my own personal work and journey in relationship to the power that I had. And in this dream, which I think of now as both interminable and incredibly short, she stood before me larger than life and in a sort of telepathy communicated with me saying, essentially, you have a choice. Do you choose to live or to die? Because it's really that simple.
Wow.
Now, mind you, yes, I was, sort of bolt upright in bed. I was sweating furiously. I was shaking. It was a very embodied experience. And the years haven't diminished in the retelling sort of my own, bodily response in this moment of sharing it with you. And so that was an instigation, sort of an opening of a door that I later encountered when I went to India under the pretenses of doing my doctoral field work. I was very interested in the spiritual motivations of women-led environmental movements, women who were out doing the work of saving their communities and the planet, and who were inspired by something larger than themselves. So, under the auspices of doing that work, I went to India and a door opened in a meeting that I had after giving thanks for not dying during a political uprising in a town that I was in the southern part of West Bengal. And I went to a Kali Mandir in somewhat homage to my dream. I knew that it had been Kali who had appeared to me in the dream, didn't really know the particulars of sort of why or what face of the divine female it was. I mean, I knew it was Ma, but I wasn't sort of sure. And I labeled it as Kali, and I went to give thanks at this Kali temple. And similarly, a door I knew opened. I was invited into the priest's home, and he, in my face, sort of much like we do palm reading here in India, it's really, really common to do sort of face reading. And in any event, he had not, even though the town where he was, because it was is a pilgrimage center in Hinduism, and it's seaside, beautiful location. There were many, many foreign tourists there, center for a big Hare Krishna community as well. But he had never taken on a Western disciple. And in that moment asked me if I would stay with him and learn with him. And so that door opened. At first I said, no, I've got to go, right. A little bit scared, a little bit, unsure. And I came back. I actually took an overnight train ride back to Calcutta. And I couldn't sleep. It was one of those times in your life when, again, a door is opening. There's a possibility for something here. I was terrified, but that dream was with me. You have an opportunity to connect some of these dots, and being so uncertain and yet so curious, I chose to take the train back after that, sort of proverbial 3-day waiting period, and went back to the town of Puri, where he was located, and then studied with Shyam Sundar Das at the Mabata Kali Mandir in Puri in Orissa. So that's a little bit about the journey, a little bit about how Ma came to me, again, sort of choosing me, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I have to say that, in India, getting back to the struggles that I was having when I had that dream, in India is where I found a vision of the divine female that instigated the truth of and depth of my healing process from anorexia, because in her, I found, for example, in particular, the goddess Chamunda, who is depicted in her iconography as an emaciated skeletal goddess. And when I found her in stone, I was floored, literally, found myself sitting on the floor of the museum in front of her. This was a museum piece that had been taken from a temple. And I was in tears. I was a mess. I thought, if only this image of the divine, had been there for me, not only goddess, not only female, but in my own struggles, seeming to me in that moment as a representation that represented everything that I was fighting for internally and with internally. And there she was, right? And there she was venerated. And the vermilion, the red on her was still apparent, that she had been loved and adored. And you can tell that the sculptor who had crafted her was in love with her in the process of sculpting. It was one of those magical moments for me, transformational moments for me. And even though when I had gone to India, I wasn't still in the physical throes of the disease, I still was in the psycho-spiritual throes of the disease. Right. And so that moment and that connection with Goddess, particularly with Chamunda, a sister of Kali Ma, was an answer for me and really, really catalyzed the full depth of my own healing.
Well, I think that's really important, and body image and eating disorders and all of that is a really big social justice topic for me. You know, and I'm a fat woman. I've had eating disorder myself and still working through that. And, you know, for me, I've had a similar experience recently, actually, because I'm doing a working with the deities that I usually work with. And one of the deities is the Dagda, and he's a big fat dude. And, you know, one of the things, it was kind of that similar kind of resonance where a similar kind of thing where, you know, one of my meditations where I was just like really getting down on myself, really thinking like my body's horrible and this, that, and the other, and all of that stuff. And, you know, in the meditation, I had a vision of him patting his belly. He's like, listen, if I'm a god that I can have a fat belly, you can too. And, you know, it's kind of that, like, if you can see deity, yourself in deity, it's huge. It's a really
transformational.
Big deal. So that was a side thing now, but coming back to your story, you went to India. What happened when you came back? Because if I remember, you said that you went twice, right?
Well, I went many, many times in between the period of 1998 when I was there initially for 6 months and 2009 when I went still pregnant with my now 6-year-old daughter. I traveled every year, at least once a year, to India. Sometimes, you know, the initial journey was the longest, but sometimes staying up to 2 months, sometimes as short as 3 weeks. But I went every year. And so, you know, took people on pilgrimage to sacred sites. We're actually really excited to be going back to India this December in community. And it will be the first time since I was there when I was pregnant with my daughter that I will be going back. And so, you know, India is changing so quickly. I am incredibly excited about what I will see and experience and hear, but, you know, most of all, of course, looking forward to being reconnected to some of my teachers and friends and my extended family in India now. So very, very excited to be going back. But yes, came back from India after that first trip in 1998 and had been encouraged, or I could say sort of given a mandate by my teacher. And this is to quote him, to go spread mother worship. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I thought I want to share what I have experienced and the power of the transformational journey that I have embarked on with other people. And now I've been given the blessing to go do that. So I started Sharanya. Sharanya is the name of our community. Sharanya in Sanskrit means refuge or sanctuary. And what we do is provide a safe space for seekers, worshipers. You don't have to be Hindu. You don't have to be tantric. You have to, though, come committed to doing the work of spiritual transformation. And that means starting with yourself in order to create a better world for everyone. And that may sound very lofty and very sort of cliche, but I do firmly believe and am committed to the reality of the personal work, creating the kinds of external changes that I think so many of us want to see, whether it's around poverty alleviation or sustainability or peace building, creation of safe spaces for everyone. We have to, again, get rid of those inner demons in order to be able to be in the world in ways that are healthy for everyone. So the community is open, provides that kind of safe space. for the work. It's not easy work, the work of being with goddesses like Kali and honoring the sacred female and sacred male in relationship in ways that talk about the potency and power, the violence and creativity, the truth of our reality in this world, being incarnate, encapsulated spirit. Is difficult, is a challenge, and we address those challenges and we engage those challenges, and in some ways, we seek out those challenges through the specific practices that we employ in order to acknowledge the difficulties of our world and of who we are.
What are some of the practices that you use?
Well, I would first encourage everyone to come to one of our open pujas. Puja means
Absolutely.
worship, and we have open worship ceremonies every month. They must be one must RSVP. So I encourage you to visit our website, sharanya.org, in order to sign up. So please do that.
We'll have that in the show notes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I really think that the worship has to be experienced. In Tantra, what we recognize about ritual is that it's a way of creating the cosmic order and reality and engaging with it in the here and now. And so ritual becomes a space for the transformation of symbol within ourselves, sort of external representations, then taking on inner form, inner sort of energy that can help facilitate our own change and our own growth and our own movement on the path. And so the pujas are engaging with practices that help facilitate that process. They're also incredibly devotional. We sing, we chant, we make offerings to the fire, we make offerings of flowers to Ma, we open our hearts, we let our guard down, we allow ourselves to be naked before her. Some of the greatest representations in art of the Raudra Devis, the fierce goddesses like Kali, like Chamunda, like Durga, she's shown on a battlefield, engaging these torments. She's shown naked. She's shown Digambara, or sky-clad. And we figuratively engage that in and through our ceremony to allow ourselves to be stripped of our pretenses, our ego, and of course the symbolism of Kali herself with her scimitar, sort of chopping off the head, holding the head above her, is a representation of that directly, if you're familiar with what she looks like. So, the ritual, the puja, is about 2 hours long. We engage in those kinds of practices. Again, the hope is that people can come with a willingness, maybe a little bit of trepidation, but a willingness to really go into the darkness. And so we help create the supportive environment for people to do that. And then we have a number of opportunities for learning and engagement beyond the pujas, but puja certainly is a first step. Part of what's so important, I've alluded to this, but I want to make explicit in the work that we do on the tantric path, is individual practice. Coming together as community, of course, provides support and a backbone and a reassurance. And it's not just the physical community gathering, it's the reverberations of the circles across time and space into which we're connected by virtue of our lineage, which makes it incredibly powerful to sit and recognize and honor and absorb those teachers and those teachings. But it's really our commitment as individuals to doing the work on a daily basis. And so a lot of what we teach and a lot of what comes out of and resonates in and through puja is what we commit to, again, each and every day through practices that may sound very, very familiar to anyone on any spiritual path around right action and right conduct and right speech, sort of the basic tenets of how to be a good person in the world, but then through practices, whether it's a kind of meditation, active or sitting, but then pick particular practices that allow us to take on the responsibility for being part of this world. And so in Tantra, we have a number of ways to do that. But again, going back to the importance of each one of our commitments and the reassurance that we have our sisters and brothers at our back in this work, to be able to do that again every day, because by doing it every day, just like a physical activity and sort of a strengthening kind of exercise, whether it's running or what have you that you might be doing or engaging with, you get better as you do more of it. So we're strengthening our internal muscle. We're strengthening our ability to engage on the unseen plane. We're engaged, with our, again, subtle body and the spaces of energy that lie within in order to facilitate the kinds of transformation of mind, body, and spirit that do make us whole.
Yeah, I like I mentioned earlier, I'm doing a personal practice now that, I've gotten back into my own daily practice. And I agree. I mean, I find it's very important. And, there's a lot of other benefits just besides our own spiritual growth. I realize that, there's benefits that because my anxiety is down. So, it makes some of my relationships better and, all these other things that doing this kind of daily practice is. And yet, I find a lot of people are like, oh, I wish I could do a daily practice. I just don't know if I can keep it up. And how would you help people who don't know how to keep up a daily practice or have trouble keeping up a daily practice?
I think that one key way to success is to allow yourself 5 minutes of a commitment every day. Because if you can say, I commit to 5 minutes, and you do candle gazing, or you do scrying, or you pick a tarot card, if you have 5 minutes of self-reflection, if you sit and chant for 5 minutes, if you do whatever you're passionate about for a very small amount of time, and it's just that small amount of time, I find it often can help catalyze people into a practice, and then you see the results right away. That's the amazing thing. Absolutely. Whether it's, like you said, reducing anxiety or giving you a sense of inner peace or what have you. So often it works for people, depends on your schedule, but I would suggest, even before you set your feet on the floor in the morning when your alarm goes off and you get out of bed, that you have 5 minutes, instead of hitting the snooze alarm, you have 5 minutes to ground, center, connect into whether it's your chakras, your subtle body energies, however you want to think about them. If you connect with a loved pet or a loved one, if you have a time of intentional reflection, relational engagement, something that puts you into that space of magic and awareness, that's your practice. And I think if we come at an understanding of a committed practice like that, it can make it easier. And then just allowing ourselves the time and the space. Start with 5 minutes.
Yeah. And it's, I think the other part of that too, besides starting small and then finding something that you like, and not beating yourself up if you miss it. Like if you miss a day, feel like you've done it wrong or something, just kind of okay, I missed a day, I'll do it tomorrow. That kind of thing. Yeah. Like not worrying about, trying to do it every day, but not worrying about if something happens to make you miss it or, you have to shorten your time or whatever.
I agree. And I say that we collectively must cultivate an attitude of playfulness and movement toward happiness and fun. We carry around so much judgment and doubt and fear and all of these other kinds of things as we engage in every day that it makes it difficult to sustain a daily practice. Mm-hmm. If we shift our disposition, if we shift our engagement in life toward one of anticipated curiosity, right? If we shift toward a willingness to be open to love, if we shift to a place of creating goodness and finding the good things, there are ways of approaching every day that can make the, commitment to a practice so much easier because we'll be eager to do it rather than fearing the missing of it.
Why do you think people tend to resist some sort of spiritual practice when, like, especially, like I
Because they
was,
have to change.
oh no, right, right. That's true.
That's why we all resist anything, because it forces us to change, because we're scared, because it's hard, because we often don't have support. All of
Mhm.
those reasons.
Why do you think people think that daily practice is weird? Like, you're just mentioning about, like, sometimes we don't have support for this kind of working. Why do you think that is?
Well, my goodness. I would say try and inhabit more spaces where it's not weird.
Right, right, right.
um, but of course, that's not always possible. I think I understand your question. I think we do need support. I think whether it's with a loved one, a partner, our children, to do it with enjoyment with someone can be incredibly helpful. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's often said, whether it's starting an exercise program or quitting smoking or anything that's difficult, we don't want to change, and that's tied to our awareness of our physical reality as well. It makes it really, really difficult. But I'm not sure that I have another way of approaching it. I mean, I think I have just over time cultivated spaces for myself where that kind of a disposition and awareness is just probably much more accessible. And even if it's not, I feel free talking about it, and I don't have any worries or about sort of others' judgments. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just don't inhabit those kinds of relationships, right? Or try not to, or just let them sort of flow off me.
Right.
Um, yeah.
What would you say is the most misunderstood aspect, not only of your tradition, but of Kali?
Oh my goodness. Well, the obvious one for Tantra is all the sort of neo tantric stuff we get over websites about sexual fulfillment and gratification. And that's really important work. Of course, as with anything like that, when people are out to make money, there's a lot
Yeah.
of manipulation and challenge. And I
Right.
think one has to be incredibly discerning. Again, the work is important. Yes, there's a very true strain of sexual practice. But it's, my goodness, the neo tantric stuff is just way off the mark. In any event, I think that's the big piece, and that's sort of the elephant in the room. In terms of Kali, it's interesting because whether you're here in the developed world, the West, US, Europe, what have you, or you're in India, she inspires fear. In
Mm-hmm.
India, or among the Indian diaspora, there are many, many, many who wouldn't go into a Kali temple. And in the U.S., there are many who won't work with Kali because they're afraid of her. So, for years and years and years, the Sharanya community has been hosting and putting on Kali pujas at Pantheacon, which is one of the, largest international gatherings of pagans in San Jose, where you're located.
Yep. Yep.
And I think we've done that. We didn't do it this year, but we've done it, I think, probably for 10 years running. And it's a wonderful opportunity for people to have access to her and be inspired and see that she is as much a part of love as is Kuan Yin or Mary, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, choose your sort of, if you will, light and fluffy goddess. I mean, I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean that sort of in the sense of, when most people think of Kali, they immediately go into sort of a very dualistic frame, thinking about her iconography, thinking about her as a dark goddess. Yes, she is. She's a dark goddess, however, because she provides us with entry into the underworld of our fears and our inhibitions and what is taboo and all of the things that social justice inspires us to engage.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that, again, whether it's in India or here, we have some of the same sort of troubles, and those are human troubles, and those are human struggles. Those are not about where we were born or what religion we follow. It's about really the human condition. So my invitation to everyone is to open to her as a goddess of love, to open to her in a way that recognizes that she represents the totality of our potential. And if we, of course, circumscribe ourselves to the light, we miss the power of the fullness of who we are, right? We miss so much of, the gifting we could do in the world, where we're able to harness more of our own potential by doing the hard work of the personal transformation that we've spoken about earlier in this conversation. So as we struggle through this incarnation, she really, I think, helps to hold us and provide that support as we struggle with the outer world reality. So if there's no one else at your back, you have Ma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the interactions I've had with Kalima, she does come off as that. It's like, well, to say it succinctly, I suppose it's complicated. Like she has, like you said, the dark side part, but I've always interacted with her in that capacity and as a teacher, because there's some things that have been important to me and my wife that we've learned from her. And so it's always fascinating to hear people talk about the deities that they work with, because there is that complexity. And I think people tend to kind of try and want to keep the deities simplistic. Mm-hmm. And, not really try and dig deeper into who they are and how they work.
Yeah, you're bringing something to mind. I think that's also important, and I want to make sure is mentioned on this call. And that is how one approaches her. I have to say, engage with her, of course, absolutely, and please, I implore you, respect where she comes from. Oh. Be willing to not just say, oh, this circle, we will invoke Kali. I would encourage you, please, to be mindful of where she comes from and the tradition that she arises out of, because it is a living goddess tradition. This is a living, not only practice, but living reality for millions of people. We cannot just engage with her sort of as we would like among a plethora of other goddesses. Mm-hmm. Please find appropriate teachers to help you enter into her mysteries. Please find appropriate resources. Please do your homework. Absolutely. As you choose to engage with her. And I will speak, as the leader within my own community, and also as an academician, as somebody who entered into this doing the research and formally studying Sanskrit and spending time in India, if you will, paying my dues. But then certainly, contextualizing for the people who come into community who are from here, who are not, who are not necessarily from the Indian diaspora, the Hindu diaspora, but who are Westerners really, really earnestly seeking to know themselves and to know her. And so providing a contextualized space for that to happen. But, she is accessible to many. She comes to many as she did me. So this is not sort of a prohibition against engaging with her, but this is just a friendly caution and an invitation to do so appropriately.
I actually make sure to tell people that too. It's like, listen, we got this information, but we don't know a whole lot about her, and you need to go find somebody who will. And I usually do that for most of the deities that I know something about, but I don't know completely about. I have my people that I go ask them, because like I've worked with, I've done a little bit of work with Yamaya, but I know of her and I've seen her and being possessing others, but I have my people that I can ask because they're in that tradition. So I do highly encourage that.
Yes, and I would certainly welcome inquiries from you or others if this is of interest and if she is of interest. So thank you for that opportunity.
Oh, no problem. We usually put contact information in the show notes, so that's really great. One of the things I want to touch on is when people think of goddess worship, usually they're thinking more on the Dianic side of the street, so to speak. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with all the dust up about transgender women. And I was wondering and transgender people and gender variant people. And I was wondering how your tradition approaches gender variant people and transgender people.
So many of you may be familiar with already that the Hindu tradition has already accepted the transgender people. We have the Hijras in India, who are a strong and very numerous group of folks, communities throughout the Indian subcontinent who are a very, very integral part of many Hindu rites of passage, including weddings and other kinds of ceremonies. So there's wonderful resources available on the Hijras in India. Within Tantra specifically, we have very much an open embrace for trans people. The tradition is founded on the interplay of light and dark, of the dualities that we experience in the world, and oftentimes through male and female, various forms of gender expression therefore fit into a continuum for us, and we enjoy the play of that engagement. There are very, very famous images, for example, of Shiva and Shakti, or of sort of half man, half woman, called Ardhanarishvara, where the divine is represented in a way that really shows that we are the totality, we are all of this. And so you can look at the both end as much as you can look at the fullness of expression available to us within the incarnation. So we are welcoming of all.
That's really awesome. And I have a few friends that have researched that and found it really interesting. And I do keep meaning to do research myself, but I haven't had the time because I'm writing a book. So it's kind of ate my brain. What do you like most about being a priest of your particular tradition, especially since it's not as common a tradition to be in the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. What do I like most about it?
Yeah, most about being a priest or teaching this tradition, and just being in this tradition in the U.S.
Well, from a very personal place, it's just who I am. I love what I do. I love the worship. I love the philosophy. I love the living, the breathing, everything of it. So there's no sort of separation between my identity and that role or work or what have you. So my choice, right? This is what I do. This is who I am. In terms of being a representative of the faith in the U.S., marginal, it actually provides a lot of opportunities for entering into uncommon spaces in dialogue with others who do represent mainstream faith traditions. And sometimes that's in academic circles, the American Academy of Religion, for example, or gatherings of, interfaith clergy, where it's usually different to be a Hindu and certainly different to be a tantric, but to be able to talk about that. And then in India, it's also different. So you asked me about the US, but I would say just similarly, in India, it's also different because you don't have people in India going around publicly claiming, just like in the US, most people don't say, I'm a witch.
Right.
You don't have people in India saying, I'm a tantric. It doesn't, it's comparable sort of in the what could come up against you, right, in those spaces, and what sort of culturally you might have to face. But in India, I get to sit with politicians and lawyers and social justice advocates and women working at the grassroots for social transformation or land rights or food security or what have you. And I get to be who I am. And I find spaces of connection, in and through the faith, which is wonderful because it is centered in this belief that you, whoever you are, have the potential and have the power and can get the voice to create the kinds of things that you want to create. And I can sometimes help facilitate that. So in any way that I can show up as clergy, show up as a teacher, show up as just me, whatever that is, right? Or the totality of all that is, I find that, having come into what it means to be a powerful woman in the world is tremendous. It's being a sister, it's being a friend, it's sometimes being a mentor or a teacher, what have you. But it creates an opportunity in and through my faith and my practice to show others, or to help share with others, and to help reflect back to others. So, it's not just the US, it's many different spaces, but I'm really honored to have the privilege I have and the space that I occupy, and be able to be in those relationships that I have, sort of new, old, or yet to come. Very, very honored and very, very grateful.
So does this allow you to do a lot of social justice work between cultures?
A good question. Well, interestingly, I work on social justice every day, not just as a faith practitioner and clergy, but also through my work at Global Fund for Women. I work for an international women's fund that works around the world in 175 different countries to promote gender equality. And so, truthfully, bringing myself into that work is not disconnected from my faith, right? It's just a different expression of what it looks like. So, yes, I do that every day.
Oh, excellent. So we're just about towards the end of our time. And if people would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Sure. I mentioned earlier, but let me repeat again. Our website is sharanya.org. It's SHARANYA.org. You can feel free to email me through our website. We have a contact information page. And again, absolutely open invitation for folks to RSVP for our next puja. Would really love to have new faces in our circle and help support you in your own personal spiritual journeys.
Well, excellent. We'll have all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Delighted to have been with you, Gina. Thanks so much for some great questions. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Awesome. I'd like to thank Chandra for joining us on This Week in Heresy. You can subscribe to This Week in Heresy via TuneIn, iTunes, Stitcher, or the podcatcher of your choice. You can also financially support this podcast through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave me a message through Twitter at TWIH Podcast or on thisweekinheresy.com.